Okay, seeing it's 7 o'clock, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Bellingham Planning Commission, the May 6th, 2021 meeting. Heather, can you please call a roll?
Ali Taishi.
Did you get me? Here. Sorry.
Rose Lathrop.
Here.
Victor Crissetti.
Here.
Jed Ballou.
Here.
Mike Estes.
Here.
And Scott Jones might be joining us in a little bit.
Okay. Since we have some new folks, if you're pretty standard Zoom stuff applies. If you're a panelist, staff, and commissioners, try and stay muted unless we're in a collaborative discussion, which we'll be doing later on. And before we get into, well, first off, I'd like to welcome our new member. Jed Ballou joins us. We're going to put you on the spot for just a second. If you could just give us a little about you, what you love about Bellingham, what draws you to the Planning Commission.
Hey, everybody. So I'm Jed Ballou. I am an architect, a principal at Zervis Architects. Been here at Zervis for 2.5 years. Previous to that, I worked remotely in Bellingham for a little over 1.5 years. Came here by way of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Moved here with my family, kids and in-laws, my wife and kids and in-laws. And we were attracted to Bellingham just because we vacationed here. It's a beautiful place. Love the Cascades, the mountain biking, all the outdoor things that are going on here. In terms of coming to the Bellingham, the Planning Commission, interested in just kind of like the long-term outlook for the city. See a lot of things changing. I'm part of that change, I think, someone who came here based on what the city offers. So I'm, part of the reason why the city's changing, but my hope is that it is a place that has some of the character of what it has been from the past, and still is a place where you can expect people can afford to live here, would want to move here, and can keep some of its existing charm.
Great, thanks, Jeb. Welcome. We have one set of minutes that were circulated over email. They're from March 4th. I hope everyone had a chance to look them over. I think we just approved these roughly via consensus. If anyone has additions or objections to approving the minutes, please speak up now. Otherwise, we'll consider the minutes approved. Hearing no objection, we'll mark those minutes as approved. Quick note for the attendees, we're about to jump into public comment. If your hand is raised because you're having a technical issue, please email haven@cob.org. Otherwise, we'll get into public comment in just a second, or right now. So we're going to do public comment on any topic. Tonight's agenda for the Planning Commission is one work session item on mobile home parks, which is the same topic we talked about at our last meeting. So we're going to just open up to public comment on any topic at all. We're going to do one. Since we don't have a public hearing, we don't have any proposal in front of you. We're not going to do separate public comments tonight. So right now is your one shot for the public to give us a piece of your mind. We're going to do 3 minutes on any topic that you're concerned about within planning, housing, etc. So first hand up, or Heather, do you want to call people in that have their hands up?
Sure. Go ahead, Douglas.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Hey, so this is Doug from Homes Now, Not Later. We manage the 2 tiny home communities in Bellingham, the first 2 tiny home communities in Bellingham, Unity Village and Swift Haven. I think that the Planning Commission should recommend that the City Council changes their policy, in the municipal code, BMC 20.15.050, section C. That part pertains to the idea that tiny home communities, the amount of time that they can last. So right now in the municipal code, it has a hard limit of 2 years. And Unity Village, it's been in operation for almost 2 years. In August, we will hit that hard limit. It's not about the fact that the sewer treatment plant is needed right now or not, or anything like that. It's just the fact that in the municipal code, there's a hard limit on 2 years only. And so it's been recommended, I think, later in this meeting that it's going to be 5 years, but I would say that it should be more circumstantial. Like, why just 2 years or 5 years? Why a hard number? Why not a system where it's like, okay, yeah, we need this land for something else, so your tiny home community has to go. But like, why have it be a hard limit on 5 years if that site is needed, if is not needed for anything else after that 5 years? So anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to say that I really think that tiny home communities are of value to our city and our county, and that they help a lot of people get out of homelessness, and that we use sites that are not standard or not suitable for standard development, and that we can really alleviate the problem in a bang for buck fashion with very minimal investment, and that we should just do more of it, more sites, whatever. And it's weird to have an arbitrary time limit on if it's working and there's no other use for that land. Why an arbitrary time limit? Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Go ahead, Ann.
Thank you. Ann Sadler here, the president of the Association of Manufactured Homeowners, better known as AMHO. And I'm here to speak about park preservation. There are 10 parks in the city limits of Bellingham, and a lot of these parks are, the tenants in these parks are senior citizens on fixed income. Then we also have low income families. And so I would request that you suggest to the city council that we do have a park preservation for homeowners in communities within the city limits of Bellingham, because they offer an affordable living place for people to live. And if these parks are closed and repurposed, where will these people go? A lot of them, this is their last stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Any other public comment tonight? Just use the raise your hand function in Zoom if you wish to chime in. Seeing that, this time we'll move into our next section, which is our work session on mobile home park preservation. Greg, are you starting us off tonight? Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by introducing staff that's here tonight. I'm Greg Ockett with the Planning Department. With me is our Director, Rick Sepler, and our GIS Analyst, Chris Behe. The purpose of tonight's meeting, this is a work session. We're hoping to relay some information to you that we've learned, give you some background information on the mobile home park issue. And this is the beginning of the Commission's review process. We will be holding a public hearing. We'll be developing staff recommendations and holding a public hearing on those recommendations later this summer. And so everyone will get a chance to comment on those recommendations and make your feelings known to the Commission at that time. And then once this issue winds up with the City Council, the same thing is true. They will hold a public hearing and offer folks an opportunity to comment on the issue. I also wanted to let any of the folks that live in the parks that are listening, that on Monday, the City Council will extend the moratorium on redevelopment of any of the parks through till December. So pretty much till the end of the year. So I wanted to let folks know that. I hope that maybe gives people a little bit of peace of mind. Tonight, we just wanted to run through a brief presentation. Chris and I will go through the individual parks, talk about their characteristics a little bit. We want to share with you the results of a displacement risk analysis that we've done for the 10 parks. Talk a little bit about the preservation options, and then talk about next steps. And then at the end there, we'll have time for Planning Commission comments and questions. We want to make note of any questions that you have, or any additional information that you think you'll need that we can provide for you at the public hearing. I also wanted to mention that we've gotten a few emails in the last few days from folks on this issue, and we will provide those to you as part of the public record. So if folks want to comment at this time, they can send us an email, and we'll make those part of the public record for the commission. So with that, we'll launch right into it. Chris, can you bring up the presentation slides for me? Everybody see that?
Mhm.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Chris. Yeah, so I just went through this with you. So let's go ahead to the next slide. There are, as you know, there are 10 parks in Bellingham, almost 900 pads. Of the 10 parks in the city, 6 of them are age restricted to 55 and older. And you can see on the map on the right-hand side where the 10 parks are located. And the numbers in the circles are the number of units within each of the parks. So you can see they are distributed around the community, some in the north, some in the central town, and some in the south end as well. We did have one mobile home park that closed back in 2009, was the last time that happened. And it was redeveloped into a 154 unit senior apartment project. That was the Baker Creek Mobile Park. Go ahead, Chris. And this is a picture of that park that was closed in 2009. Let me hold on a second. Okay, let me do this. Okay, so go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry, I had to move that away. So this is Maple Park. This is in the Birchwood neighborhood. There are 9 units, 9 pads located here. It's on less than an acre. Built in 1974, open to all ages. It has a current zoning of RM plan 2,500 square feet per unit. This is the smallest of the parks in town. Next slide. This is Bakerview Mobile Estates. This is up in the area near the mall off south of Bakerview Road. Has 126 units. It's on 18, almost 19 acres. Built over time, beginning in the late 70s. It's a single family zoned area with 6,000 square feet per unit, with a planned requirement for any expansion. We know that this park has a lot of families in it. According to the school district, there are a bunch of kids here, live here, that go to Bellingham schools. So we know this is a family-oriented park. Next slide. James Street Estates. This is the one example we have in town where the park is actually owned by the residents. Each individual unit is individually owned, and then collectively they own the land. And that was done, I believe, back in the late 90s. I want to say the residents got together and purchased this park. So it can be done. It sits on almost 20 acres. There are 94 pads there. It is age restricted to 55 and older. And as I said, condo style ownership. Next slide. Millwheel Park. This is next to Millwheel Village. It's near Lake Whatcom. 134 pads on over 25 acres. Built in the early 70s. Most of our parks are of that vintage. It has a residential multifamily zoning, and the density is discretionary on this parcel. Next slide. Crest Haven, now we're at the south end of town. Crest Haven, 33 pads on a little over 3 acres, built in the early 50s, age restricted, has a single family zoning, half-acre zoning on it now. Lakeway Mobile Estates on Lincoln Street. I believe this is the largest of the parks that are in town, over 200 pads on over 25 acres, built in the late 60s. This is an age-restricted park as well. Residential multi-planned density sits on this land. Samish Court, west of Samish Way, 28 pads, 21 manufactured homes and 7 RVs. That was as of 2020. It's on 3 acres. Park originally started a long time ago in the 1940s. It's open to all ages. This property is part of the Samish Way Urban Village. It's in a commercial transition zone. Could accommodate a fair number of units. When the Samish Way Urban Village plan was adopted, that urban village zoning was established, and it was, I guess, anticipated that this property would redevelop at some point in the future. Back again to the south side, the South End Mobile Estates, 84 pads on 10 acres, built in the late 50s, age restricted as well. It has got a single family zoning designation. Yeah, next one, please. Parkway Village, also at the south end of town off of Old Fairhaven Parkway, over 100 pads on 16 acres, built in the mid 80s, age restricted. This has a residential, a multifamily, also zoning designation at 4,000 square feet per unit. Robin Lane off of Chuckanut Drive, 54 pads, 54 units as of October on 8 acres, built in the late 60s, age restricted, has a single family zoning designation, 7,200 square feet, minimum lot size. Well, this one's in our urban growth area. We can skip this one, Chris. Yeah, these two. Okay. Redevelopment potential. So one of the things we did was we looked at the redevelopment potential of each of the 10 parks, depending or relying on the current zoning. And you'll see that the parks are listed on the left-hand side. The zoning is listed in the middle. And what's shown are the existing units in these parks. And then the potential, if they were to be redeveloped, the potential number of units that could be put there based on the current zoning. And you'll see that in many of the cases, there isn't a lot of redevelopment potential. In fact, some of the sites would actually lose units if they were to redevelop into some other form. There are several that have some fairly significant redevelopment potential, including Samish Court and Bakerview Estates, or I'm sorry, Samish Court and let's see, what was the other one? Parkway Village has some, and then it's Mill Wheel Village that doesn't have a density listed, so it's unknown how many units could be placed there. And the same is true with Lakeway Mobile Estates. There's no density established in the current zoning, so it's unknown at this time how many units could go there if that park was redeveloped. Okay, next slide. When we looked at, and this again summarizes the redevelopment potential, total estimated capacity of the redevelopment potential, and this is of all 14 parks, including the ones in our UGA. Not a lot of additional housing units would be realized, except for the one, as I mentioned, in the Samish Way Urban Village. We did not allocate future redevelopment potential to the mobile home parks when we're looking at how much land area and how much additional development can we expect in future years. Go ahead, Chris. This is the comprehensive plan direction, goal and policy language that directs us to do this work, to identify and evaluate methods to encourage the preservation of the mobile home parks. And that's, we have the policy basis in our comp plan, both in the land use and in the housing chapter, to identify options for council for their review. And I'll ask Chris to go through the results of the displacement risk analysis that we recently completed. Chris?
All right. Thanks, Greg. So the displacement risk analysis that we did is modeled step by step on the same method that the city of Portland used, that their Bureau of Planning and Sustainability used a few years back for looking at exactly the same issues. They have 54 parks within the city of Portland, and in 2018 adopted this methodology along with a comprehensive report and incorporated some amendments to their comp plan and zoning structure to memorialize that and to protect different parks. So the vulnerability analysis I'll be stepping through is for Bellingham, but it's using the same methods that that they used. It primarily looks at 4 criteria: the concentration of renters, communities of color, adults without a college degree, and then low-income households, and compares areas that are above the city average in all of those criteria to the locations of the manufactured home parks in town, to highlight ones that may be at increased risk of, where there are people living there that would be at increased risk of economic displacement, just kind of highlighting the relationship between their economic situation and the housing that they're in. This is just an example of what Portland's final composite map looks like, and I'll get to the one for Bellingham in a few minutes here, but just so you have that in mind. So I'll just step through each of the 4 criteria. This is looking at the renter concentration. And all of this is coming, the data for these 4 criteria are coming from the American Community Survey that the Census Bureau updates every year. And this is we did this analysis a year and a half ago. So at that point, the 2018 data was the most recent. And it's the geography you see on the map. Those are not city neighborhoods. Those are census block groups, which is the finest geography we can get this information at. So it paints a relatively detailed picture, a little bit smaller than city neighborhoods in some cases. And so looking at renters, the citywide average is just under 55% of the city is, the housing in the city is renter occupied. And so we were looking for block groups where there were more than that percentage of renters. And you can see a graded scale here, 1 to 10, kind of a standardized numbered scale, but the lowest value being the 4% renters, all the way up to some where we have 100% renters. And 6 of the 10 mobile home parks, you can see the ones that are circled with the bold purple circles here, were in areas that have an above average for the city concentration of renters. For communities of color, Bellingham, as you all know, is from a racial standpoint, is still relatively homogenous compared to like Seattle or some other, certainly other parts of our country. On average, the number of people in Bellingham that checked something other than white alone as their racial identity is about 17.5%. And so we use that as our metric and just said, you know, how many of these manufactured home parks are in areas where the number of people that checked something other than identifying as white alone is greater than 17.5%. And most of them, 9 out of 10 of the parks, are in areas that were above that citywide average. For the no college degree metric, again, looking at the 25 and over population, so we're getting beyond that, the age where people would have received their undergraduate degree for the most part. And looking at the number of people who were over 25 without a 2-year or a 4-year degree, the citywide average is about 42.6%. And so we were looking at how many of the parks fell within areas with greater than 42.6%. And 6 of the 10 parks in town fell within areas that were greater than that amount. And then finally, looking at the income, the citywide median household income is just under $51,000. And so we were looking at areas that were where the average income or the median income for that census block group was below that value. And 8 of the 10 parks were in areas that are below that threshold. And so then following the model, again, each of these 4 criteria that we were looking at, we scaled them from their actual percentages, which of course varied based on the criteria. And in some cases, it was a dollar figure instead of a percentage. We scaled those to a 1 to 10, from the smallest value to the largest value, a 1 to 10 even scale. So we could get a low of 1 or a high of 10 for each of those metrics, so that the highest possible value would be a score of 40 when you look at the 4 of them as a composite, and the lowest would have been a 4. And then when we map those out, this is the final composite map. And so we have 4 different colors showing on the map, the 0 to 10 range, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, and then the highest being 31 to 40. And so what we're really looking at is those 2 upper categories. So anything in the above 20, basically, where you would have the based on those 1 to 10 scores for each of the 4 metrics, we're having an above average value for the majority of those for the composite. And so 8 of the 10 parks that we were looking at in town are in areas that experience a higher than the citywide average value for the majority of those 4 metrics. And then looking at land appreciation, we didn't really look the value of the improvements or the manufactured homes themselves doesn't really play into it as much, but the land value itself, as it's valued by the county assessor, is a good indicator of potential future development or interest in development for the property. That's, as you know, that's done based on a variety of factors, but one is what's happening in the neighborhood around it, or what's happening with similar properties in the area. And so we looked at the change in value for the 10 manufactured home parks over the last 5 years, the 2015 to 2020 period. And over that period, 7 of the 10 parks had some increase in land value. 4 of them showed increases of greater than 50%, and 1 increased by 180%, so some very significant increases. And then 5 of the parks that had value increases also were identified as having an above average risk displacement in that vulnerability analysis. And so here, this is just a different version of that redevelopment potential table that Greg was looking at earlier. And so the yellow highlighted records, those are the parks that experienced an increase in value. If you look at the far right column here, these are the increases over the 5-year period. You can see there were 3 of them. Maplewood, Bakerview Mobile Estates, and James Street Estates had no change in value. They have not been, they have not experienced an increase in value since before 2015. And then Millville Park and Robin Lane and Lakeway Mobile Estates had fairly modest increases, 14 to 25%. And then you can see Parkway Village had a 67% increase. Cresthaven and Samish Court were 100 and 117%. And then the one that went up the most was South End Mobile Estates, which is right on the Old Fairhaven Parkway, and it went up 180%. So a fairly dramatic increase in value. And then you can see the red box here surrounds the 5 that were also identified in the displacement risk analysis as having a higher than average value for the income levels, the education levels, the racial diversity, and the concentration of renters. And then here those are on the map. The purple circles are the ones that were ranked higher in the displacement risk analysis, and then these red circled ones are the ones that all had a significant increase in valuation. And then those percent increases next to them there for reference. So,
Okay. Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, before we move on to next steps, I wanted to talk a little bit about the options that are being reviewed. And I think I listed them in the memo that went to the commission. And there are a range of options that are available, from extending the notification period of a park closure or sale beyond the 1-year requirement that the state has. Locally, we could extend that requirement for an additional year, perhaps. The legislature has talked about extending it to 3 years. That bill did not pass this time, but those discussions go on, and I think will continue. The city could also help the residents connect with state resources that are available for relocation assistance and other programs that the state has to help folks when one of these parks is proposed to be closed. The city could get involved in facilitating a sale of the park, either to the to the current residents, which is what happened with James Street Estates. The residents could band together and purchase the park from the owner. Obviously, that ensures the park will continue and helps ensure the affordability. We could also be a conduit to other organizations that have in other jurisdictions helped in these circumstances, whether it be a housing provider or a land trust, something that would purchase the park, some organization that would help purchase the park and keep it in place and help keep it affordable. And finally, there is the zoning option that some jurisdictions have used, placed zoning restrictions on these properties, to basically limit the units or limit the uses to essentially what's there now, or very limited uses that would be allowed to help ensure the continuation of the parks. It doesn't ensure affordability, unfortunately. So that's sort of the range of alternatives that we're looking at, and we'll be providing you with recommendations for each of the parks as part of your public hearing process. So the next steps are, we're going to continue the information gathering process. We'll develop staff recommendations and then a planning commission public hearing later this summer with opportunities for public comment and the commission to make recommendations to the city council. So that's a fair amount of information in a short period of time, and I wanted to leave time for planning commission comments and questions. But before we do that, I guess I'd ask Director Sepler, is there anything that you would like to add at this point?
Can you take the screen? Thank you. That's helpful. There's a public purpose as expressed in our comprehensive plan of preserving manufactured home parks. As noted, it is one of the most affordable means of home ownership. And there's a broad range of people who've taken advantage of it. It is a challenging issue that the legislature has tried to address for the last half dozen years. The risk of displacement is not imminent, though it is still in play. In essence, we know of no specific proposal to close any parks. Nonetheless, it's prudent for us to provide a safety net and a plan forward for all of them. That's what this process is about. And I think Greg was spot on. There is no one size that fits all. Some of the proponents go just downzone them. There are instances where downzone parks are basically abandoned and they closed them and they waited out because fallow land, the law favors the land being used for something. So that may not guarantee that the park will remain in place. We need to find a way to ensure continuity of it and do it fairly. There is a trade-off, though. As municipal intervention continues or increases, the ability for individuals there to realize a return decreases. In essence, we wouldn't wade in to purchase a park unless we can ensure that those ownerships would be perpetually affordable, much like a land use model, land trust model. And in local areas, that's what's been used. Bainbridge Island partnered with their land trust. The city acquired the underlying property. The property owners are paying back that acquisition cost because they're paying their monthly fees, and part of it goes to solve the debt. So complex issue, no one size fits all. Each park will need to be reviewed specifically, and then a recommendation will have to be promulgated and forwarded on to the council.
Let the record show that Commissioner Jones has joined us. Welcome, Scott. So at this point, do you have any comments or questions, pieces of information that you would like us to be researching before we come back to you for a public hearing later this summer?
I'm curious about the affordability, and if you guys have done any of the market research to see just where these homes fall and how well they're appreciating. Like, do mobile home parks like a mobile home and also this is another question: do we call them mobile homes or are we manufactured parks? Because I think we've been using them kind of interchangeably, and I don't know that they're the same. So just getting clarity on what the proper term to use, and then trying to get a better understanding of the market for these.
And we continue to work on that. We know that in general, mobile homes or manufactured homes don't appreciate. They depreciate, much like an automobile, right? They're not like a home on a piece of land. They don't appreciate necessarily. So, of course, there are market forces at work that can cause them to appreciate. And I think that's happened. But we continue to look into that, and get that information for you.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Mike. I was wondering why, well, first, the primary question would be, when it came to the demographics of looking at the neighborhood within the census, wouldn't the mobile home park bring in a different demographic specifically to the mobile home park, being that it was 55 plus, or because it was a higher concentration of affordability? Wouldn't the demographic within the mobile home park be different than the surrounding houses or the census group surrounding it? How would they be similar or different?
I can answer that. I would agree with you that, yeah, a lot of times, especially if it's one of the age restricted parks, it's likely to be somewhat different. That being said, it is helpful to know what the neighborhood around them is experiencing. And as Greg said, some of the ones, Bakerview Mobile Estates is a good example, is in a census block group that is fairly low income. It's almost entirely either multifamily housing or that manufactured home park itself, and also has, as we've heard from the school district, a large number of families living there with K through 12 students enrolled in the district. So that one actually fits quite well with the demographics of the census geography that it sits inside of, but some of the other ones may not, and that's a fair point.
Jed, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering on the rezoning option, if those cities that have done that, what is the effect on the land value? Does it go up, down, stay the same? And then are there any legal challenges that have come about from landowners just opposed to that based on, possible loss of value?
I could take that one. There's a fairly well-known case where a jurisdiction put a protective zone, which had very limited uses, were challenged, but they prevailed. That's an older case. Issues have changed. Notably, you may have followed the manufactured home park that was near SeaTac. It was well covered, fairly affordable area, strong community, but the land value had appreciated because of the land uses around it. And they were unable to mobilize to purchase it. The zoning was evaluated for that jurisdiction, and at that time, they did not believe that it would survive scrutiny because the land values had increased so greatly. It would be favoring one class of owners against another class of owners, and they didn't choose to pursue it. So that's the most recent example. We're not precluding a zoning change, but we think that it may not be broad-based. It might be with consequence if you change the zoning to achieve a public end. So we'll be looking at where it might apply or other solutions might apply. And to be fair, I think one of the outcomes of Chris's analysis is that some parks are just fine. They don't require any change because they either own their own pads or they have very low risk of displacement. One question we didn't respond to, and I think it's alluded to in next steps, is we need to reach out, and we've already done so, both Greg and Chris have, to many of the property owners and understand what their plans and interests are. Are they inclined to sell these properties or redevelop them? Or are they committed to the model that's before them? I mean, that's one of the things we should consider. It's the risk of conversion that prompted this study. If there is no certainty that that will occur in the 10-year horizon, it may not merit a more invasive solution. I think you can see you try to pair it to the risk that's there, and that's going to take some time.
Ollie, you're next up.
Thanks, Mike. I had two real quick questions that were more just curiosities. Some of these parks have recreational vehicles in them as well, and we never really talk about that. I don't think it's very many of them, but how does that come into play here? Are we kind of ignoring those pads, or do they just count as a unit in the mobile home park?
Yeah, no, we count them as pads in the park.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whether they have an RV or an actual mobile home.
Yes.
And then this was the first presentation where we kind of saw the 3 or 4 parks that are in the county included in the data. And it made me think about how this would work if the city took action on the parks that are in the corporate limits. Like, would we be planning to structure whatever action we take so that it could be then applied to a park that would be annexed into the city? Or would we have to kind of deal with that when it happened?
Well, it depends, I think, on the outcome of, whatever's decided for the city parks. If it's a process that we go through with a number of steps, looking at ways to help with displacement or closure, those could be applied to any of the parks that come into the city. If it's a zoning option, obviously that would require an action to change zoning once that property is in the city.
Okay, that kind of ties to what Rick just talked about with whether there's a need now, but it made me think, we could have an owner say, I'm not doing anything, and then 3 or 4 years from now change their mind for whatever reason, economic factors or a family issue or who knows what, inheritance. And I think it would be good to ensure that whatever solutions you guys are looking at for the next meeting, that we're thinking about how to be light on our toes, so that if we don't go through this entire exercise and then move on with our lives and then have a need to address an issue down the road a little ways, when none of us might be here. So setting a framework that we could implement, it kind of ties back to this UGA question. It's something that we could implement or be ready to implement when the actual need occurs, I think, is a really important component of this. That's more a comment. If anybody else has questions, I can jump around. I had one more, but I can wait, Mike, give some other people a chance.
Go ahead, just finish out your comment.
Okay, so my other question was about if there's any more information you can provide us on how, I guess I'm having trouble wrapping my head around how this would be implemented legislatively if we pick different solutions for different parks. You know, if we do a zoning change is appropriate for this park, that's one type of process. We do nothing over here. In this park, we decide we want to buy it. Can you talk a little bit more about what we're expecting to see at the next meeting, at the hearing, in terms of like a document?
Well, yeah, I think if staff ends up recommending zoning, for instance, zoning change, for instance, that is a process, and we need to notice that and have the new language ready for you to review. If it's something different, it may not require a separate legislative process. Obviously, if the choice is to do nothing, that doesn't require any process. If we're setting up a system whereby we have these various methods of intervention that are not code related, that's a separate action that the council could take in resolution form or whatever the proper form is. So there may be a number of different instruments that end up being the implementation of this discussion.
Thanks.
If I could just add on, I think it's really creating a strategy. You may have followed in Lake Forest Park. It was a 2.5-year process to sort through all of the manufactured homes and decide which ones were the public interest to preserve and ensure continued affordability. In others, they gave a 10-year stand down, saying to appreciate the investment, there'll be 10 years and these will convert. So notice was provided. And the circumstances were very different between those parks. So we are informed by those other processes, but I think the bottom line for us is each of ours appears fairly unique, and we'll just have to take a closer look to see what is the best tool.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I was hoping to get a picture of what like turnover looks like if it's a renter or an owner, like how often are people moving out and a new person's moving in? Is there like an average length of tenure? Do new units ever get brought in? If it's changing hands, someone's moving out, does the physical mobile home ever change and a new unit comes in? Or we've talked about, these are pretty old units, sometimes in poor condition. I'm just thinking about things like heating quality and insulation quality, if those are just like degrading over time, or if there's like a refreshing and weatherization that happens.
Okay, we can provide that information for you.
I can speak just briefly on just one aspect of that. We do every year for our update to the Office of Financial Management at the state, when we report all of our new permits for the year. We also call each of the manufactured home parks and find out how many new units have been moved in and old ones moved out or demolished. I can just tell you, in my time at the city, it's usually a handful in any given year at most. So of the 900-ish units we've got in town, you'd see like 3 to 5 maybe per year that get swapped out for where an old unit's demolished or pulled out and a new one is brought in. So it does happen. It's not a large number though.
That's all. Scott, you're next.
Thanks. I'm confused about how the moratorium works, and in parallel, how are the mobile home parks legally organized so that if they're in a zoning of single family, it just can't be, well, maybe it is. How are they legally organized? I guess I'll just leave it at that. And maybe there'll be a follow-up question.
I'm not sure what you mean by legally organized.
Well, so right now there's a moratorium on the mobile home parks changing in any way, right? The city council has done that.
Right.
But if they're in single family zoning, there must be some sort of legal organization separate from just being a large piece of property in a single family zoned area or a multifamily zoned area that makes the moratorium have teeth, that locks those mobile homes into not being able to do anything or sell during this time. So they must have some sort of legal organization separate from just being a large piece of property.
I think most of them are just large pieces of property, or in some cases, there are 2 or 3 parcels that cover the site. And the moratorium doesn't allow the property to be redeveloped. It doesn't allow the city to accept or process any redevelopment applications while the moratorium is in place.
If I could jump on, I think Commissioner Jones, your question is how are they structured and entitled? Their entitlement's usually a permit set of some sort of approval that was granted. So there is some underlying approval that runs with virtually all of the parks. And I don't have the provenance in each one and how long they were. They didn't just happen. So that approval ties them together and establishes them. And those are the things that we're saying you can't alter from that approval at this point and convert. So yeah, we'd have to go back and we could find out the dates, whatever the current zoning at the time was that permitted it, that allowed it to go through review and be approved.
Okay, thanks.
Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on your question about energy efficiency and the quality of the homes. And just to note that the Community Energy Challenge and the Opportunity Council work with mobile home homeowners to make energy efficiency improvements. And in fact, right now there's a pilot program that they're doing, which is actually a full house swap. So they're upgrading the whole house because it can be challenging to do all that work.
Thanks. Rick?
If I could, the city has for over 30 years had a program to ensure stability of manufactured homes. And we've been very successful in helping a number of residents at many of these parks do repairs and maintain their units, weatherize them and improve them.
Good. Ollie, your hands up, go ahead.
Thanks, Mike. It sounds like the next presentation on this is going to be our public hearing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And a presentation of, so there's going to be a more fully formulated presentation on each park and the city's, analysis for that. I don't want to ask you to like show your cards. I know you've been thinking about this a lot, but has there been any, all we've heard to date is kind of like framework thinking. Has there been any digging down yet? I'm curious. And are you, I understand this is a difficult, when you look at the pros and cons of these various options, it's difficult to evaluate. And when I think of each park, I like go different directions. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything more you can give us in anticipation of that to think about. Are there particular ideas that the city believes are going to be more effective at this point, or do you need to do more work on this to get there?
Yeah, we need to do more work. We're not at the point where we can say certain interventions or certain tools will work in certain parks. We're not ready to do that yet.
Are you looking for thoughts from the commission at this stage?
Sure.
Sure. I'm just wondering, because if we get to a hearing and we're presented with a specific idea for each park, we're more reactive to that versus a discussion of, what, I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on this, but what these feel like now. Because I just had a couple thoughts on like the rezone option, for example. I think Rick, you alluded to this, that it doesn't necessarily protect affordability. I've read quite a bit about parks around the country. One of the biggest problems is that as people cycle through, because it's a depreciated asset, because it goes away over time, people cycle through and the landlord takes advantage of that opportunity to, require a more expensive unit or tie someone into financing associated with a unit that they've purchased and bump rents. And in the presentation, it talked about that too. So there's a risk that permanent affordability can't be maintained just through a zoning restriction. that's just a thought I'd like to share, because it seems like I understand the logic behind it, but I think it doesn't directly achieve maybe the primary end goal. And you posed the question in the staff report of what is the end goal? Are we trying to protect the existing tenants or the long-term affordability? So I'd be curious to hear staff frame that at the time of the hearing a little bit, what the city believes the end goal is, because I think different solutions work better depending on which way you go there, whether you're trying to protect the current tenants and what they own, which is not necessarily an appreciating asset, or, no matter what you do, or the long-term affordability of the space. So that's just a thought. I would personally like to kind of hear more about when we get to the hearing.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Rose.
What was I gonna say? I can't remember now. I got so excited about Ollie's comment, actually. Yeah.
Any last comments or questions on mobile home parks?
Have you guys talked to Colshan Community Land Trust at all? Have they been part of the conversation?
We have
Yes,
talked to them briefly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and to be fair, that may be a tool. It may apply to one or none of the parks, or perhaps more. We had hoped through the displacement analysis that we'd focus our efforts. I think you see that it's not as conclusive as we had hoped, because we really want to target in on those that are most at risk and ensure affordability, because that's the public interest. Absent that, it's important for us to be fairly thoughtful. And we've talked about just informally, almost a flow chart, of how you proceed through this to understand the logic of where you're proposing. And I think that might be helpful to bring that forward when we present it. A bunch of key questions that frame the next step you go into to ultimately the ones that really merit the intervention.
Jed, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, talking about just grouping these with manufactured homes, it seems like, there's kind of like this mobile home, and then there's a tiny home, and then there's like prefab. And so all these things are kind of like, they are in a similar category, but you think of mobile home parks as being kind of limited to, these single wide or double wide manufactured type of homes that you could put on the back of a semi and move around, or else like a RV. I was wondering, is there any thought of like kind of having a mixture of different types of housing there? One thought is that most, manufactured homes that would be at a mobile home park are one story, which, I don't know if there's any thought of being able to increase density. Some tiny homes may have like sleeping lofts or things like that, where you can actually get a little bit more space on a piece of property. And it seems like since Bellingham, one of our main issues is we're kind of short of space, given that we have a need for affordable housing. I wasn't sure if that was something that was being considered.
Yeah, it's a good thought. And so, yeah, we'll note those comments. That's a good thought.
All right. Any other comments from commissioners? Staff, final thoughts on the mobile home parks?
Well, as I said, we'll be coming back to you this summer with lots of information and an opportunity for the public to comment. In the meantime, we'll continue to talk to residents and owners, find out as much as we can. This is a complicated issue, as Rick said. You're dealing with the economics of individual owners and property owners, and so it's a complicated issue, and we expect that you will take some time working your way through it, and that's just fine. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about this quite a bit more in the next few months. And with that, I think we're good at the staff level. I do want to give Director Sepler the opportunity to provide you with some information under the director's report tonight, some upcoming issues that he's going to be bringing before you.
Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Good evening, commissioners. We're entering a lively time for the Planning Commission. In the coming weeks, you'll have a public hearing on the residential multi project to ensure that we realize in our multifamily zones the density we envisioned. That'll be on the 20th. On June 3rd, there'll be a public meeting on the City View project. Some of the commissioners might recall that there's a provision in the code that the planning director or the planning commission chair on an issue that comes forward that typically is not reviewed by the planning commission but has significant public interest could be considered. The planning commission's role in that is not to promulgate a recommendation approving or denying the project. It's not a hearing for that matter. It's to identify those key issues that you wish staff to focus their review on based on what they have from reviewing the public record and reviewing the comments received at the public meeting. So that will be on the 3rd and will be a fairly lively meeting. On June 10th, there'll be a follow-up to your hearing on the 20th, the residential multi-work session. And it'll give a chance for you to hear consider the comments and that were provided and make whatever revisions you wish to the draft ordinance. And if you feel confident, promulgate direct staff to prepare findings and promulgate a recommendation to the City Council on that matter. On June 17th, and I'll be speaking to that, I hope to bring before you a number of code revisions, and they are by their nature relatively minor, though they may have great import. And I'd like to hold those public hearings on the 17th, but I'd like to introduce those to you right now. And I think it might be helpful to just frame them. It is challenging to do minor code revisions. And the reason for that is that all of them require notice, 30 days. They require us to do environmental review. Sometimes it's best for us to batch them, and we've done so. The first will be a revision that's to 2015-050C of the code, and that's the tiny homes. I think you heard a commenter during earlier meeting speak to that. Currently, the code permits an approval, it's administrative, from 90 days to up to 2 years. That's the longest time frame we have for any of the temporary encampments for the unsheltered that we offer. And we offer a variety. As you might recall, a number of you were on the commission when we established temporary tent encampments, temporary encampments in buildings, and safe parking. In this, the recommendation that likely will come forward from staff and be brought to public hearing is to extend that for up to a 5-year term to allow for 3 consecutive 1-year renewals. And this would be a request that would have criteria. The criteria would be that an application would have to be made 60 days before expiration. It'd have to show that the tiny home encampment has been operated in strict compliance with all of the requirements of the chapter and the approval. So therefore, it's been a good neighbor. There've been no issues in operation. And that it also, for those that are on city land or receiving city funding, they would have to participate in the homeless management intake system. I want to clarify that system can be modified so it's not a mandatory referral, but they could consider those who have entered into that program. I know that's of concern for the Homes Now folks, and rightly so. They don't want to feel obligated to accept everyone because they have a unique model. We can certainly work on clarifying that. These renewals will be subject to a type 1 review. They're administrative. The basis for doing this extension is threefold. The first is the costs of establishing tiny home villages is significant. Unlike a tent encampment or safe parking or an encampment in a building, you need to make them weather tight. There's a cost to establishing the units. Typically, you want to do greater improvements for sanitary, cooking, water, and the cost itself merits it. And they're more stable. They're not as transitory in the sense that they can survive climatic change. Secondly, if there are no impacts to the surrounding area, and there is a degree of success in getting folks out of these units and into housing, we should allow those units to continue until our housing emergency is gone. And we should support efficacy. I should mention that those who enter into a license agreement or service agreement as part of this revision will set a performance standard for placement on an annual basis into permanent housing. So those that are successful and meet that bar, currently Seattle uses 40% as a good number. And I know Homes Now is currently exceeding that number of placement annually. That's good measure. If they're getting folks into permanent housing, that's the goal. The third is to respond on point to the concern of why can't these be open-ended? These are temporary emergency uses. If we did not have if we let them go open-ended, then they're permanent. If they're permanent, by law, they must meet all of our building codes. None of our units meet our building codes. None of the sanitary facilities meet our building codes. None of the cooking facilities meet our building codes. So in order to be able to preserve the options of being much more flexible during this emergency, we need to call it temporary. We need to have a limit on its usage. Nothing prevents someone from meeting the code requirements in the International Building Code and establishing a permanent facility, but it would have to meet the IBC codes. So that ordinance would come forward to effect that change, and we would take it to public hearing. You'll hear and consider comment. If you feel it's appropriate as proposed, you'll recommend it. If you feel it merits discussion, you can take it to workshop session, or you could propose changes that day, or again, there's always the opportunity that if you don't feel it has merit, you could recommend it not be approved to the council. The second matter that's coming forward is dealing with a modification to Chapter 7.12 regarding standards associated with the keeping of bees. You might ask why 7.12 is not something that typically comes to our planning commission, but because it deals with a setback standard, we believe it's appropriate to give the public an opportunity to comment and for council to take action based on your recommendation. Our current regulations on beekeeping, I've been told, are among the most highly restrictive in the state. Some with knowledge in the field assert that they are prohibitive for folks who engage in a fruitful hobby or avocation that has significant benefits. Right now, our current regulations state that hives have to be 50 feet from all property lines. And one can understand why they're probably promulgated. They were trying to separate potential nuisance or adverse effects. But if you know urban lots, I think you realize there's no lot big enough, short of going into the Birchwood zoning, that could accommodate a 50-foot setback on each side. You'd be a 10,000 square foot lot. And other communities have found that there's been success in urban uses of beekeeping, and that there are approaches that can be incorporated that can minimize adverse effects in the surrounding area and promote their use. As I noted, beekeeping has significant benefits. It helps pollinate local vegetation. It produces honey, and which is healthy foods and adds to our food supply. And it does encourage small cell economic uses in some cases. And it's been asserted also that if you ingest and use the honeys that's locally produced, it can reduce your reaction to allergies. So many cities have taken a stab at reviewing this, and we've evaluated the approaches. It seemed to us that we didn't need to cut a new cloth, that we could benefit from the work that was done in other communities. And we're going to propose Seattle's revision, because it's well documented, that would essentially allow hives to be within 25 feet of a line. You can't do it within 25 feet, except if you do some interventions such as elevating the height of the hive or constructing taller fences that redirect the flight path of the bees. Those are based on other jurisdictions, and I know we'll have members of the local Mount Baker beekeeping group in attendance at our public hearing, and they will know far more than I do on this matter, but I do think it merits a change in our code. The last measure to bring forward is one that is dealing with the state preemption. Council members might recall that we talked about the family definition and the appropriate way of dealing with it. Senate Bill 5235 was passed by the legislature and is currently on the governor's desk. Should it be signed, and we believe it will be, it is one that directs that housing unit inventory be increased by removing arbitrary limits on housing options. The bill has two main threads. The first thread is addressing parking requirements and owner occupancy requirements for accessory dwelling units. It addresses those on point, and I'll come back to that in a second. The second is it strictly prohibits cities and counties from limiting the number of unrelated persons that may occupy a household or dwelling unit. The revisions for ADUs are deferred based on the legislation as proposed till 2 years after our next comp plan update. So that would be 2025, I believe, plus 2 years. However, it does also have a means of avoiding it, and that says that if your ADU ordinance was adopted or substantially amended within the 4 years prior to June 11th, 2020, which ours was, because it was in May of 2018, you do not have to comply with ADU regulations. So we're opted out of that change. However, we are, like other cities in the state, required to move forward and address the family definition. As the commissioners will recall, our family definition talks about one or more persons related by blood, marriage, or adoption, or not more than 3 unrelated persons. That limitation would be inconsistent with Senate Bill 5235 and needs to be revised. I should say that there needs to be greater care on this than just strictly striking out the number of people of unrelated and calling it good. And the reason for that is we've heard a concern that's been voiced consistently about, absent a number specific limitation, non-resident landlords will build and individually rent out every bedroom that they can. The further assertion is that neighborhoods would be overwhelmed with parked cars, inevitably noise and other issues due to an increased density. While eliminating the restriction for unrelated individuals seems relatively straightforward, there are some unintended consequences that we'd like the Planning Commission to consider, as well as the community. That really focuses about fractional rentals within a single unit. Fractional rentals are those rental agreements that are 30 days or longer, because if you're less here, it's a transient accommodation, with separate leases for all renters, in which an individual rents a specific bedroom or sleeping area and then shares common space. It does not involve those other folks who are living on the site. So in essence, it's done independent of their involvement in the process. So it's not like looking for a roommate. Suddenly someone shows up and they've got a bedroom and they're part of it. From our interpretation, that's a boarding house. That's not folks living together as a housing unit. So we're going to try to accommodate that because fractional rentals concurrently are accommodated in a number of zoning districts that allow for boarding or rooming houses, but probably not in the single unit, single family districts themselves. I think what we want to ensure is that the intent here is to promote access, to say that there are different housing forms, housing groups that assemble, and they should be allowed to have the same rights that family would. They should share common facilities. They should not have individual leases. They should share a common address without separate apartments. They should share common utility services, not have separate meters. And they should not have separate design features like individual apartments. That's multifamily. units. So towards that end, staff's approach would be to amend the family definition to strike the unrelated because we need to be in compliance with state law. This is a preemption and folks may like it or not, but that is a state action that we must be in compliance with. The second is we would craft a new definition for a household unit. A household unit will be the functional equivalent of the family. Those are those folks who share common facilities, who don't have individual leases, who share a common address and don't have separate apartments, and don't have individual rentals. They're not fractional rentals. They're part of a living group that chooses to live together for a variety of reasons. And finally, we need to amend the boarding and rooming components of our code so that we can be consistent with the distinction between renting out as almost a commercial venture bedrooms to individuals without the knowledge or consent of people who are living in the building and folks who are living together as a housing unit. A couple of notes to share with you on this. This isn't the only solution. In changing their code, Seattle just responded by eliminating the restriction, but putting a maximum cap on the number of bedrooms. They went to 9 bedrooms for the max. Don't know if that's appropriate or not, but we'll evaluate it. And I will say, none of the things we're considering to meet the state preemption will make enforcement any easier on these matters. Staff still firmly believes that if the concern is parking and noise and litter, we need to address our nuisance laws, not micromanage the nature of living arrangements. So that matter would be prepared with a detailed staff report. It would come forward at the end of consideration during a public hearing. It's likely you might wish to hold a work session on it, having heard from the public. And the options that are available, and we certainly want to support you in that effort. So I'd be happy to answer your questions on any of the 3 forthcoming ordinances. Especially the bees. I'm ready for that. No.
Enjoyed your fruitful pun. I assume that was intentional. Shame on you. Scott, go ahead. Did you have your hand up?
Could you repeat the legislative bill number again?
Sure. It's Senate Bill 5235, and we'll be sending you materials on
Okay,
that.
thank you.
I should also note that on the 17th, we'll do the code amendment hearings, and if time is available, will be the introduction to the Shoreline Master Program update. That's a process that will be going throughout the summer and into the fall. We're required by state law to update our Shoreline Master Program based on the Shoreline Management Act. Very interesting and focused program, one that has great effect within 200 feet of the shoreline. We'll be starting that review this summer.
Rick, I was, but no longer am, an urban beekeeper. Do you think that that would force me to recuse myself from that discussion?
So you're stating you're a recovering beekeeper.
I am. I'm out now. But I have strong opinions about the topic.
I think it's just fine. You know, it's an area that caught attention of a number of our council members. Just in some very preliminary research, we've had some members of the community providing materials to us. There are significant benefits. There are 130 species of trees that rely on bees to, plants that rely on bees to pollinate them. And we have had a crisis nationally where the bees are disappearing. Reintroducing in urban areas have significant benefit to all of us. And if we could overcome some of the issues conclusively, I think that's a good start.
Any other questions for Mr. Sepler on the proposed code changes that we'll be hearing about more? There's no other hands. Heather, did we have any old or new business tonight?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I don't see anything else on our agenda, so I will move us to adjourn. Thanks, everybody.